Hi everyone, it's Amy here from the blog I Think Therefore I Teach. I have set my first year students the big challenge of writing their first full essay. So I thought I would do a short video just to support them and others in learning the techniques that they need when it comes to writing a philosophy essay. So this one is for the topic of soul, mind and body. The question you can see next to me, which is the mind can be understood through physical and material interactions, discuss. Right. The first thing that you need to do is decide what is your line of argument going to be. If you are unsure about this topic, check out the video I've just done earlier on the whole topic of mind, soul, body, because it's a very layered topic. There's a lot in this topic that you can talk about. There's also a lot in this topic you can reject and leave behind. You don't have to talk about everything in a topic. You have to just give a good holistic view of your understanding. So you need to decide, when looking at the idea of a mind or a soul, is this just something that can be explained physically? Something that can be explained just with the material, body, can be explained through science? If the answer is yes, you are team Dawkins or you are team behaviourism. That is going to be your line of argument, that you are going to support them and therefore find the strengths with them. If you go, I think there's some truth with Plato, I think there's some truth with Descartes, I think there's some truth with Aristotle, that there is something else, then you are going to go against the question, that it cannot just be understood through the physical because there's something else there. When it comes to your introductions then, the starting point of your essay, an introduction needs to be about 6 lines. We're talking about a small chunk here. Examiners are very, very clear. They do not want you to spend a long time writing an introduction. They want you to get on with your essay. You only have about 37 minutes in the first year and 40 minutes in the second year. That is not a long time to write an essay. And so therefore, don't spend a long time on an introduction. Best things to establish an introduction, first and foremost, is your line of argument. Tell the examiners what you're going to argue. How are you engaging with that question? So don't forget, don't ever use I think. You need to channel yourself and channel your arguments through the people who you agree with. So if you are going to go with the line of argument, as I've said, of supporting it, then you need to start by making it clear that it can be explained through physical or material interactions, such as shown through Dawkins' behaviourism, etc. If you want to argue the opposite, you need to still keep the focus on Dawkins and behaviourism. You have to still talk about this in this essay. This is what the essay is asking. The essay is asking for physical and material interactions. You have to talk about the physical and material people, but you then criticise them. And so you might want to bring in other names that you think are therefore better. So in an introduction, you need to make that clear to a reader where you're going. You could also, in your introduction, maybe start with a quote. I always say to my students, start with a quote. Why? Because it gets you going. It gets you started. So I would Google quotes. Don't just stick with the ones on the PowerPoints. Don't just stick with Dawkins. Just see what quotes are out there about mind. See what quotes are out there about physical or material, or how are we just bodies. Find a quote you like, and that you can engage with, and use that as your starting point. Don't forget, if you use a quote, that you need to set it out in the right way. So let me just type out how you need. So with a quote, you need to put the name of the person first. You need to put who they actually are. So quite often, if it's a philosopher or an atheist or a theologian, I'll know who they are, but sometimes quotes are from people I've never heard of. Who are they? Are they an American writer? Are they a politician? Are they a singer-songwriter? Who are they that have come up with that quote? So name who they are, and then where have they talked about this quote? Where is the quote from? Is it from a lecture? Is it from a book? Is it from a seminar? What is it for? I guess lectures and seminars are kind of the same thing. But where is it from then? And then go into the quote. So name who they are, where is it from, and then says, argues, posits, presents, whatever word you would like to use. And then pop your, no, that's not a quote, that's a quote. Pop your quote like that. Fab start. Straight in at that top level, because you are engaging with wider understanding, wider material. You then need to put that quote into your own words. So this means, this implies, this informs, this links to. You need to use that quote to link it to the question. Why is that quote of relevance? What is it saying about the question you are about to answer? And use that as a springboard to then bring in your names. So use that as a springboard to then say how it links to Dawkins links to behaviourism or goes against Plato or supports Plato rather than Dawkins or whatever it might be. So use that quote as your starting point. So quote, put it into your own words, link it then to what you're going to argue, your line of argument, and then that's it. That should take you 4 to 6 lines, and then off you go into your main paragraphs. When it comes to your main paragraphs, I'd say roughly 4. 4 paragraphs is what you will need, because these paragraphs are going to be extensive, they're going to be lengthy. We're not talking about small chunks here, we're talking about a good sizable paragraph. By the time you've done 50% explanation, 50% evaluation, that's going to be a big chunk. You cannot do it quickly. So you're going to be looking at about 4 of them as a full essay. Keep the structure all the way through this to do with the question. So keep the structure all the way through on Dawkins and behaviourism. What I mean by structure is every paragraph theme, every start of every paragraph needs to be on something material or physical. And then you can either support it or criticise it depending on your line of argument. So your 4 paragraphs, so you know your 4 paragraphs are going to be on either Dawkins and or behaviourism. If you want to bring in other arguments, wow, look at the spelling of that, behaviourism. Behaviourism, you can bring in other arguments, other things like that if you want to, as long as it's to do with physical or material. But those are the 2 main names that we've looked at. And then obviously you've only got 2 names there. You've only got Dawkins and behaviourism. Yeah, I've already said you need to do 4 paragraphs on them. How do you do that? You break the arguments down into chunks. So Dawkins, for example, I'd maybe break down into 2 themes and then maybe break behaviourism down into 2 themes. So you have a theme per paragraph. Now, what do I mean by themes? A theme is something that you can discuss at length. A theme is an idea that you can evaluate. A theme is something to do with the question, and it will help you to argue for or against the question. So for Dawkins, I think there's there's 1 slide on my PowerPoint for Dawkins. I think there's 3 separate sections to that PowerPoint. You've got kind of the first bit where he's saying science is going to find it in DNA. You've got kind of the second little bit about Sol 1 and Sol 2 that kind of goes into the third part again, which is explaining why we need these definitions and distinctions. So whilst it's all linked, you can break them up. I would deal with Sol 1 and Sol 2, for example, as a theme in itself. You know, what is he arguing there? So break them up into themes. You could do a theme on behaviourism with the reward and punishment. You could then do a theme that's on the examples of how we can be conditioned through classical conditioning and use one of the Pavlov's dogs or the Watson-Rayner example. I think it's Watson and Rayner example. So you break them into themes as well. So keep your themes nice and small, but whatever you start with in that paragraph is the theme that runs all the way through it. If you did a paragraph on Dawkins, Sol 1 and Sol 2, I'm not expecting to see all Dawkins or their theories. I'm just expecting all the way through Sol 1, Sol 2, Sol 1, Sol 2, Sol 1, Sol 2, all the way through. And so once you've got your 4 themes that you're going to talk about, this is when you then need to evaluate them. So you would start a paragraph with your line of argument. So make it clear. If you're going on the support, so you would start with something like, Dawkins makes it very clear that the mind can be explained through or understood, using the words more closely, can be understood through physical and material interactions when he explores Sol 1 and Sol 2. Sol 1 is da-da-da-da-da. Sol 2 is da-da-da-da-da. So you've got your line of argument, your first sentence. You then explain, like to somebody that's never learnt the topic before, you explain the theme. That's your description. You describe what it is that they're talking about. And then you evaluate it. You don't evaluate all of his theory. You evaluate that specific thing that you have talked about. You evaluate the Sol 1 and Sol 2 in that respect. And so what that means is, evaluate means the strengths and weaknesses, what's good and bad. You need to bring in your critical terms there. So critical terms, things like credible, logical, convincing, if you're going on the positive, or illogical, unconvincing, not valid if it's negative. And so you then need to look at, does it work or does it not work? That would get you, just doing that 4 times over, by looking at the strengths if you support it or the weaknesses if you go against it, that'd get you roughly a low C grade. But it's a very good start. If you want to move up the grades, you then need to layer your evaluation. So if you start with negatives, for example, if you start with positives of Dawkins, if you're going to support the question, you then might want to bring in a counter or a negative of why Dawkins' physical and material might not work so well. What might be wrong with it? What doesn't work? But then, because your line of argument is still going to be supporting him, you need to counter that to say, yeah, might be a bit of a problem, but it's no biggie because this bit is still stronger because of this. Okay, so if your line of argument is support physical, then you need to look at the strengths of why. Why is it physical? Convince me, tell me why a soul doesn't exist, a mind doesn't exist, and it's just physical. And then find a counter, an issue or problem with this. And then you need to defend your line of argument, defend what you're saying, okay? So your paragraph, if it starts on the positive in the beginning part of your line of argument, so when you start your paragraph with your line of argument, if your line of argument is going to be positive, you, as in supporting the question, you need to then end on a positive. You can't start a paragraph saying I support him and then finish the paragraph on actually it doesn't really work, because as a reader you're thinking, well, which one is it then? Are you supporting it or not supporting it? So you have to bookend your paragraphs. Support, criticise. So bookend your paragraphs. What you do in between, do a table tennis. Backwards and forwards. As long as I know, there's still 4 strengths versus 3 weaknesses. So I still know, that one's going to win, that one's going to top over. If you want to go on the criticism, that it's not just physical and material interactions, then you do the opposite of that. So you look at the criticisms of it, why actually Dawkins does not work, why it's not just physical and material interactions. You then might want to defend him a bit and say, but it's still quite valid he says this, or it's still quite good he says that, but actually no, it still doesn't work, stick the boot in. And do that 4 times. That would get you roughly, done properly, a high B, I would say. Sometimes I've seen students that have got into the A's and the A stars with just doing that technique, but rarely. That, I would say, that technique could get you a good B grade. If you want to go for the A grades, I will give you what to do now for the A grades. What I need you to remember when writing this is, don't go, right, I want the A grade, I'm going to write like that. No, you have to still layer it from the previous points. So you have to still do the C grade stuff, then the B grade stuff to get into the A grade. So you have to do the explain with line of argument, strengths and weaknesses, then your defence and your counter, then into what we're going to do now if you want to try and push. What I would say with your first essays is go with it. Give it a go, get it wrong, who cares? You will never get into those top bands unless you just go for it and get it wrong. Because if you get it wrong, we can then, as a teacher, we can help you develop that technique. If you never push yourself into that top, we're not going to write your essay for you. It's so much easier for me if you write it and I can help you formulate it better. But obviously, if you are going for the A's and the A stars, we're talking about a very difficult technique here. This is how you write at degree level as well. So that's what we're tuning in. So you're not going to get it right first time. And so be prepared that you will have to take it back again, maybe redraft. But very much make sure you've got your C grade stuff, then your B grade stuff. So the A grade is bringing in other names. This is A grade because this is when it gets really complicated and confusing, because you're not just juggling Dawkins' strengths and weaknesses, You then might be bringing in a bit of Aristotle, a bit of Plato. Oh, what about Descartes? What about Geach? It gets a lot more complicated to then control. Oh, I've waffled on about Geach for ages. Oh, Dawkins is long gone. Your theme is Dawkins. It stays on Dawkins. Your theme is material and physical. It stays on material and physical. So if you bring in other names, you need to do them quickly and you need to make it clear how and why they relate to your line of argument and the question of what you're answering. So if we want to go for that one, you do exactly the same thing. You do your line of argument, you do your explain, you do your strengths or weaknesses, evaluate, you do your layering of eval, but instead, so you could do your evaluate, your strengths or your weaknesses, you can still do a bit of layering as well, where you counter it just with general weaknesses, but then in your layering, you might want to bring in other names. And so this name can either be, so for example, behaviourism and Dawkins, even though they're both arguing the same thing, don't really necessarily agree. You can't just say because they are, I'd keep them completely separate. I would not put behaviourism and Dawkins in the same paragraph. I would keep them totally separate themes. Just because they both agree materialism and physical doesn't mean they agree with each other necessarily. How I would do it is I'd bring somebody in that's completely the opposite. So if you're going to argue with people, don't bring in someone that's similar views, bring someone completely different. So I would potentially use Plato or Descartes against Dawkins, for example. So let's go with Descartes. And then again, you need to go back to your line of argument. If you're going to argue Team Dawkins, you then need to say why Descartes does not work whatsoever. You could bring in a bit of Ryle at that point to say why why Descartes is wrong. You could bring a bit of Geach in there to say why Descartes is wrong. Again, do one or the other, don't do both. So that's only if you're going to go Team Dawkins and Team Materialism. If you're going to argue that actually Dawkins is wrong and Descartes is right, then bring in someone that supports Descartes, bring Plato in, or just say why Descartes' argument is so much better and just do, again, general strengths and weaknesses. So it all depends on your line of argument. What are you trying to argue? Who are you arguing is better or worse? One of my students said, can I bring in Aristotle and Anscombe? I said, yeah, brilliant, but only in relation to Dawkins or only in relation to behaviourism. So, for example, Aristotle and Anscombe are arguing that you can talk about them in separate ways, but they're linked together. So that's a really clever argument. Dawkins says there isn't anything. There is just body, there's just physical, science just needs to find it out. Whereas Aristotle and Anscombe, again, maybe just do one or the other, don't do both, but they argue that actually, hang on a minute, no, they are linked together. They both die when you die, so body and soul die together, so that again is supported by science, but there's still something there more than, that we can call a soul. You might say actually that very much supports Dawkins in that he talks about soul too, and therefore you say that what Anscombe is saying is very similar. Fantastic. You might say that Anscombe is doing something a bit different and therefore her argument is better than Dawkins. Brilliant. It does not matter what you argue or how you use these people. Just run with it. Just make it very clear to a reader what it is you're saying. All the way through my comments, I mark down the margins of my students' essays. I always put LOA, question mark, question mark. That's my feedback. Because most of the time, the comments, the essay that students write is brilliant. They've got the names in, they've got some of the key details in. But I'm thinking, but what are you actually trying to argue? What are you arguing? Which team are you on? And the other one is, where's the question gone? How are you linking Geach to the question? How are you linking Anscombe to the question? So how are you linking Dawkins to the question? You have to be explicit to a reader what it is you're trying to say, because you might think it's really obvious. Geach is arguing against dualism and therefore he can be seen to be supporting materialism or physical. But tell me that then. Tell me that. Write that down. You might argue that Anscombe actually supports physical, but also the mind, and that they can be understood together, rather as in, the mind with the physical rather than just it being physical, and that you can understand them better as separate things that work together. Fabulous. Tell me that then. If that's what you want to argue, just tell me it. And then once you've done that, what I'd also say is another thing that really helps is mini summaries. So as you're going through, because your paragraphs are going to be chunky, just do little summaries back to the question, back to where your line of argument is, back to what you're trying to tell me as a reader. So it all will make a lot of sense in your head, or actually, well, it might not. You might just be trying to put loads of names together and hope for the best. But try to take the reader on the journey that you're going through. And then finally, of course, you then have a conclusion. Conclusion, just like an intro, is about 6 lines, 4 to 6 lines. It's where you stick the boot in for your argument. Either team, materialism, physical, you win, or no, the mind can be understood in many other ways other than physical. That's what you need to conclude in your conclusion. No new info in the conclusion. Everything in the conclusion should have been mentioned in the essay. And so a conclusion, you just want to briefly summarise the top things. So a bit like on when you watch series, if you watch any episodes or series, at the beginning of each new episode it says previously, and they recount all the main bits. That's what you're doing in a conclusion, because your examiner, when you write this for 40 minutes, you're going to have a lot of pages in one of them little exam books. By the end of it, an examiner will be thinking, I don't know where we've been, what have we talked about? They might have read 200 answers at one point. They might have read 15 answers that night when they come to mark yours, and they might think, I can't remember what they've said. That's where you remind them. So in conclusion, it is clear from Dawkins' Soul 1 and Soul 2, as supported by whatever, is a far better argument than Plato's dualism, which is so flawed as presented by Geach. You don't need to go back through everything again, because an examiner will go, oh yeah, Geach, they had a whole bit earlier on him. Oh yeah, Plato, he came up there. So it's just a summary of your overall essay where you just stick in the boot either for physical and material interactions or against it. All right, folks, I hope you find this useful. Good luck with your first essay. Your first essay, there is no bar of expectation. It is just to do your absolute best. But as I've said before, please type it, because don't handwrite it, because you'll be spending so many time redrafting this in order to get it, improve it each time, that you don't want to have to write it out by hand every time. 12 font if you're sending it to me, please, because I just can't read anything smaller, and I have no space to write my comments either. And then don't forget to pop the title and your name on it if you're sending it to me. So good luck with this one. Do your very best. And just don't forget, your evaluation is critical terms. So a critical term like credible, logical, convincing, and then explain why, justify why. So why is it credible? Why does it make sense? Why is it logical? And don't forget that because explanation. Make it 2 or 3 sentences. Say the same thing 2 or 3 times in different ways. Really emphasise what point it is you're trying to say. Again, another one of my common feedbacks on my students is more. Explore further. They raise fantastic arguments and then move on to the next point after a sentence. No, give me more. Give me further exploration of that. Tell me it again in a different way. Take me on that journey of how you're supporting or criticising these names. All right, folks, thank you very, very much. I will try and do some more essay ones as we go through the course. So don't forget to subscribe, then you never miss a video. Thumbs up if you like this, and any comments or questions underneath, please feel free to add them and I'll try and reply. Otherwise, thank you very much, everyone. Bye for now.